Let's call it what it is, hydrofluosilicic acid.
Yes. I want you to explain that for us.
Yes, because a lot of people don't even know that. You know,
I know. It's 75 or 76% of the people don't even know there's mercury in an amalgam filling.
Yeah, right.
Okay. I think that's a deception. And it's continued on into this business of the adulteration of the water supply with raw untreated hazardous waste from the phosphate fertilizer mining industry. Now, who would say yes to that?
Right, that's...
But you won't find 5% of the, actually 25% of dentists don't recommend fluoridation. I'm sorry, if 25% of the pilots didn't recommend that you get on a 747, would you go flying in one?
Right. And how these...
Where is the threshold? 51%? Is it a voting thing?
What I'm learning, more importantly too, is that it's taken guys like yourselves who are in retirement that are actually willing to...
Well, I wasn't in retirement when I started this. The trouble is the science has been done. It's been done for decades, but there's a lot of industry involved that doesn't want to get rid of a program that allows them to dispose of their waste and make a profit. I mean, you know, if you were running a feed lot and somebody decided to buy the stuff that comes out of the back end of the cow for $1 a pound, you're going to continue to run the feed lot even if nobody eats the cows. You have $1 a pound for the stuff coming out. Right. So that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking raw untreated hazardous waste, selling it, making a health claim for it, which makes it a drug. Has the FDA ever approved fluoride to be swallowed? No. No, except in pharmaceuticals that are treating some other problem, such as, you know, Cipro is a fluorinated antibiotic. Well, the fact that it's an antibiotic works to save your life if you've got some sensitive infection. Right. But if you take it too long, as many of the postal workers found out when they were treating it for anthrax, they become crippled. That's because the dose of fluoride you get from mini drugs is sufficient to cause an adverse health effect. But they're saying, well, the risk versus benefits. And they say the same thing about water fluoridation. But there's no benefit. That nobody today, although they did claim for 50 years that it was really good to swallow this stuff, the Center for Disease Control in 2001, a decade ago, said that the effects are topical. You know, like sunblock. Right. You know, you're going to drink it? You're going to put it in the water? No, you rub it on your skin.
That was the CDC's 2001.
Center for Disease Control Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report 2001. I'll give you a copy of it before you go.
That's great. Well,
and you know, but that's they knew that
well, I know
30 years earlier.
Right.
It just took another 30 years. That's why old guys are still talking to the public about this, because the people who are making a living, and I know how to balance the budget. I know how to balance the budget. Those 38 people at the CDC that have nothing on their plate except to promote hazardous waste in the water supply can go find another job. Right. And then we can save all the money we're spending on hazardous waste to be imported from China, Mexico, Japan, and Florida. And all the transportation costs, all the carbon footprint from the diesel trucks running across the United States carrying the stuff.
The plastic bottle industry, how much oil, you know.
Well, I'm just talking about the stuff putting in the water. Right. And well, the plastic bottle industry might be because a certain number of people don't think it's really good to be drinking the stuff that's in the tap water.
What we're learning through our research is that I'd say 90-something% of all the bottled water industries have fluorinated water in them.
Yeah, and you know, if you go to some, you know, advanced country like, you know, Mexico, and you pick up a bottled water, if you're not real close to the U.S. border, it tells you how much fluoride there is in it, and calcium and magnesium and phosphate and all these other things. But in the United States, they tell you how much fat there is in it. Well, you know, that would float on the top and look real icky in the bottle. So that's because of lobbying by the water bottle industry. They don't want to tell you what's in their stuff. And so they had a food label put on water. Nobody in their right mind puts fat in water. So why would you have a label that tells you about fat in water? It's ridiculous. And that's so that they don't have to tell you how much fluoride there is, how much lead there is, how much bad stuff there is, because they don't want to disclose it. And they got another game that they're playing. They call non-detect. Is that they go in with the 1950s technology and try to measure for arsenic, and they say, well, you know, we can't find any. Well, why are we using 1950s technology? There are ways to measure the arsenic, and when you do, there's 91% of the arsenic that's in public water supplies is coming from the fluoridation chemicals that's added by the additive. So why would we allow them to do that? Arsenic causes cancers.
Why do you think?
Because industry has bought our representatives, and they are so busy kissing the back end of industry that they don't hear what we're saying. They got their head so far up there they can't hear a thing.
That's right. We just had what's more frightening to me is just the Supreme Court just passed the bill that gives corporations the rights as individuals. So, whereas...
Let me correct you. The Supreme Court does not pass bills.
Okay, thank you. Passed the law, right?
No.
What was
it? It ruled.
It ruled.
Yeah.
In favor of
they are supposed to. Their job is to enforce the Constitution of the United States. Right. And regrettably, the corporations have been given all of the rights of a citizen, with the exception that they can't vote. And to me, if you can't vote, you shouldn't be able to influence our elections. However, thanks to the somewhat tilted Supreme Court, they have decided that, yeah, sure, we'll let Monsanto decide whether or not we have GMO food.
Yeah, right.
You think they'll decide it's a good idea? I bet you.
Yeah, they'll find somebody, right, to put in power to make the decision to...
That's what they do. And you know, as citizens, our job is to make sure that they don't do that and take our right to choose what we're going to eat and swallow and drink away from us. And that's, unfortunately, the vast majority of people seem to fall into a coma when you start talking about that, and I don't understand it myself.
From what I've read and understand, that the history of it spawned from Nazi prison camps. It was originally put in drinking water of the Jews, right, in the prison camps, to make the population more controllable, less dominant and defiant. So my question is...
Well, let me stop you for a second.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I've heard that for 25 years, and I have an old friend. He's passed away now, but he was a physician and a dentist, and his name's Victor Penzer, and he spent 3 years in Auschwitz. And my question to Victor was, and he worked in the hospital, he knew Mengele and people like that, and my question to Victor was, did they put fluoride in the water supplies of Auschwitz? And he says that SS people with police dogs and machine guns was sufficient to control the population along with starvation, and he didn't think they put any fluoride in the water supply. And this is a guy that would know. So I think what you have is it may have happened. But you know, certainly machine guns will be more likely to control a crowd than a little dab of fluoride in the water supply. Right. So whether or not that's true, what we now have are more than 20 studies showing that fluoride diminishes the IQ of children. It impairs their intellect. It damages their brain. So whether or not they put it in the Nazi prison camp, it for sure was put in the Russian, what do they call them, gulags? But so what? Russia insisted that all of the Soviet bloc countries add it to their water supply. When Russia collapsed in 1989, all those countries quit. So now there's a huge bunch of studies showing that when you quit putting the junk in the water, tooth decay goes down. So who does and who does not do this? It's only in the United States. The lie comes from the United States, and you can tell by the countries that have decided to fluoridate. Ireland, don't they speak English? Uh-huh. Australia, don't they speak English? Uh-huh. New Zealand, don't they speak English? Uh-huh. Canada, don't they speak English? So if you're telling a lie and you're speaking to somebody in German and you don't speak their language, it's against the law to put fluoride in the water supply in Germany. So if you don't speak their language and you're lying in English, they say, das ist nicht gut, and don't do it. And so our CDC and the liars in Washington, D.C. have only had success in countries that speak English for the vast majority of the disposal of their hazardous waste product. That means that you and I and our children in the United States are the largest consumers of hydrofluosilicic acid. Call it what it is. Hydrofluosilicic acid, what is that? Hydro is water, fluo, fluoride, silicic, sand, and it's acid, so it's got an electron missing. So, and it eats through concrete, glass, stainless steel, fiberglass, plastic, you name it, it'll eat it. So Why are we putting that in the water? Because it works topically? I don't think so. We're doing it to get rid of it, not because there's any benefit whatsoever. Does it cause harm? Well, yeah. If you're a baby on a bottle, 60% of those babies are going to have spotted teeth. I'm sorry, spotted teeth? Isn't that good for the dentist business? Largest growth business in America today for a dentist is cosmetic dentistry, because people don't like funny looking brown spotted teeth. So they all start out white, but they pick up whatever you eat. So if you drink red wine, they end up pink. If you drink coffee, they end up brown. If you drink tea, they end up in a nice, kind of a purple brown. So
let me ask a question about where does it come from? Is it? I've heard that it's a byproduct of the aluminum industry. Is this true?
No, that's not true. The aluminum industry is a net consumer of fluoride. So at the very beginning, the aluminum industry was not a net consumer of fluoride, but very shortly thereafter, they discovered a way to use up the fluoride that's generated from metal smelting. Every metal is smelted and it leaks fluoride. Steel, zinc, aluminum, they all leak fluoride because fluoride is the 13th most abundant mineral on the planet, and it is sucked up by metals. So whenever you dig some more out of the ground and smash it up and bring it up to a high temperature, you're going to have fluoride leaking off of that stuff. But the aluminum industry found that it was very useful in when you have this big vat of ore that you've heated up. It's very useful in taking off the slag off the top, which is the oxides and stuff like that. You throw that in there, that fluoride will suck up that debris. And matter of fact, every welder or person that solders knows it, because you have a little bottle of flux. Well, anytime you see the letters FLUO, you're talking fluoride. So flux is used to make welding work, and because it sucks up the oxides. Fen-phen is the pharmaceutical that destroys the people's hearts, the diet drug that ruined hearts. Well, that was a fluorinated diet drug. Prozac is fluoxetine. It's a fluorinated psychoactive. Matter of fact, almost all your psychoactive drugs are fluorinated drugs. They put it in there both as a carrier and an accelerator of the effect. I hope you don't mind me correcting you, but if you're gonna do a documentary, tell them the truth. You don't have to bring in the bullshit.
Right. I'm glad. This is why I wanted to mention this. We need clarity around it because it's hard to
get
answers.
Just the molecule itself. Even put the hydrofluorosic acid aside, the sodium fluoride, all the smelting, all the army of data we have. Just look at the amount of fluoride that it accumulates in your body over a lifetime, and say, like for instance, bone. Are bones with more fluoride stronger or less strong? And the answer is less strong. And they got studies in humans where they tried to give them a dose of fluoride, sodium fluoride, to cause an increase in bone mass. It did, but it weakened the bone itself. So those are case-controlled studies. That's the gold standard in medicine. So we have case-controlled studies showing that if you give people fluoride, it accumulates in their bones and it causes the bones to become white, opaque, increases the bone density, decreases the bone tensile strength. We have epidemiological studies showing exactly the same thing happens in humans, and they actually took bone that was removed from people for the purpose of replacing a joint or a hip, put it in a little device here where you put a weight on there and snap it, and they showed that the more fluoride in the bone, the quicker it snaps. So now there are 4 studies, epidemiological studies, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in the decade between 1990 and 2000. Well, that should have been enough for everybody to say, avoid the stuff. And yet it's still ongoing. So if we just look at one little thing, the fluoride molecule, after we take all the arsenic and the lead and the cadmium and all that stuff away from it, the fluoride molecule is causing harm to bodies, harms to people, harm to bone. And the alleged benefit for teeth is so nebulous. If you ask them a specific question, show me a single broad-based blinded study of animals or humans where the addition of 1 part per million fluoride to the water of those animals or humans produced a significant reduction in permanent tooth decay. And they can't. There are 3 different trials have occurred in the United States on this issue alone. And all 3 trials determined that it increases cancer death rates. That's different than causes cancer. It does that too. But the trials determined it increased cancer death rates, aggravated existing illness, and there was no evidence of benefit. So wait a minute. How can you do a risk-benefit analysis if there's no evidence of benefit? That means it's a total, utter waste of money. Where are the teabaggers when you need them? Here we are wasting billions of dollars, sending it over to China and Japan and Mexico to buy their hazardous waste, obviously damaging our children. There was a study from 1995, Levi, published in the Journal of the American Dental Association. Hey, hello, here's a call to the dentist. If the baby on a bottle has optimally fluoridated water in there, 66% of them have dental fluorosis. 2 out of 3 kids have funny looking spotted teeth. Good for business. But bad for the kid, because that's linked to a whole host of other problems. Fluorose teeth in China are linked to a lower IQ. It's linked to weakened bones. It's linked to early onset of arthritis and skeletal fluorosis in other countries. Do we have any studies from this country? No, we don't study that kind of stuff. They can't even tell you how much fluoride there is in food because they don't measure it. They count on you to figure it out. There's no label. Where's the label?
That's why we're making this film, because we need to.
Well, I'm gonna go get some props for you in a second, because one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time is make a humorous film about how stupid the water labels are, because I've been collecting water labels from my travels, and I've lectured in 27 countries around the world, and when I'm in Italy, for example, I'll stop and pick up 2 or 3 bottles, and it tells you all the minerals in that water. So why don't we tell them that here? We don't tell them that here because we want to sell them tap water in plastic.
That's right. And it's dead water from what somebody just put a documentary out called Tapped. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it attacks and exposes the bottled water industry, and never mind the bisphenol A that's leaching into the water, but there are no minerals and nutritional values of the water, and on top of it, you're paying for it and polluting the planet at the same time. Now, this whole thing with, I've read that, you mentioned accelerants with the fluoride. I read somewhere, and maybe you can correct me on it, but that fluoride increases absorption rate of aluminum by 600%. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, that is a study in animals. I can't pull it out of my Rolodex right now, but let's talk about the actual substance that's used in 91% of the water supplies, hydrofluorosilicic acid. That in the congressional investigation of 2000, the EPA said they were unable to identify any chronic toxicological testing of hydrofluorosilicic acid. So here we're adding a product, a very strange product, to the water supply, and they don't have any chronic toxicological testing. Well, what's interesting about that, before they can add it to a single drop of your public water supply, it has to be approved under ANSI Standard 60. ANSI Standard 60 requires you to furnish a toxicological test of the product. Well, if the EPA doesn't have one, what kind of secret study do they have? And the congressional investigation determined that nobody looked high and low could find a single solitary study of the actual substance added to the water supply. So that means that those certificates of approval are false, phony. They're not even worth the paper they're printed on, and that any water supply company that wants to quit delivering adulterated water, all they have to do is ask the manufacturer for the data they submitted in order to obtain this phony certificate. And the manufacturer says, well, I see you don't like our product, we'll take it back. They'll just take the product away but never respond legitimately to your question. Or sometimes they refer you to the 38 liars at the Center for Disease Control and say, well, go talk to those dentists at the Center for Disease Control. They say it's really good to drink our hydrofluorosilicic acid.
Yeah. All right, that's awesome. One thing I want to, Paul, we want to...
Don't knock it over.
Yeah, let's start from the beginning.
All right, one thing I just want to get, what we need just for transcription is if you could just state your name and then spell it for us.
Well, my name is David Kennedy, D-A-V-I-D, K-E-N-N-E-D-Y, DDS, because I'm a dentist. Graduated in 1971 from the University of Missouri at Kansas City. I have a degree in biochemistry and physiology from the University of Kansas and graduated from there in 1967. I'm a past president of the International Academy of Oral Medicine Toxicology, and this is a group of toxicologists that was formed to bring evidence-based science into dentistry, and that was formed in 1984. Well, why? Because you get all these claims from dental organizations and dentists and dental schools that are based upon malarkey. They don't have any science to support themselves, so we decided to do that for them.
I heard that it costs $7,000 a barrel to dispose of off the internet.
Well, the answer to that question is nebulous because it really depends on the disposal of hydrofluorosilicic acid. The figure that I've seen most frequently is about $1.30 to $1.60 a gallon. How much it costs would be dependent upon the size of the barrel then. And so they're probably talking about a 500 gallon barrel. Right. So, but here's what happens, is that like for instance, Calgary, Canada stopped fluoridating this week. New York is in a battle over that. There's a number of other cities that are trying to stop the addition of hydrofluorosilicic acid to the water. So that means it's going to start piling up. And so if you're the hazardous waste collector, you're going to say, well, because of the increased volume, it's now going to be $2.50 a gallon, $3.50 a gallon, $4.50 a gallon. Pretty soon it'll be $7, $10, $12 a gallon. What's going to happen then is phosphate fertilizer won't be cheap. The reason the industry likes phosphate fertilizer, which is where all this stuff is coming from, if you didn't know that, it's coming from the phosphate fertilizer industry. If it's not cheap, then the farmer, agribiz, won't throw it out to make their tomatoes big and fat and tasteless. Because all phosphate does is make the plant thirsty. And so when the plant's thirsty, it sucks up water. So then you can go to the grocery store and sell tomatoes for the cost of water. So that's what this whole thing is about, agribiz wanting to produce phosphate fertilizer and making money off of it.
Could you educate us a little bit more on the whole process of phosphate fertilizing and explain the process and how we get fluoride from the whole agricultural industry?
Okay. Where does hydrofluorosilicic acid come from? And it basically is a hazardous waste byproduct of the manufacture of phosphate fertilizer. It's a mining byproduct. So you run the bulldozer in the mountain, you pick up 10 yards of limestone, you bring it back and you crunch it up and put phosphoric acid on top of it. Well, in the old days, it used to let the smokestack spew all the stuff out, and then we passed the EPA act that says you can't spew stuff out of your smokestack that eats cattle and Everglades and all that stuff. So they had to go to a closed system. And so basically it looks like a large coffin with the limestone in the bottom, covering on top. And inside there are the little misters that look like they use in Las Vegas on a hot day. You know how they have the whole street is made a little mist there. So they use that mist to collect the hydrofluoric acid that's coming off of this fertilizer batch, and that is recirculated around until it's about 23% hydrofluorosilicic acid. And what is that? That's hydro, water, fluo, fluoride, and silica is sand. And so they've populated all the available positions on the sand with fluoride, and it's missing an electron, so it's acidic. And that's the source of hydrofluorosilicic acid. What else do they get? They get phosphate, which they sell at Home Depot or to the agribiz to make those tasteless tomatoes you like so much, the great big ones that don't have any flavor to them.
It doesn't taste to it anymore. Is that what it's behind?
Water.
Right.
It's water. Of course, if it were this big, it would taste great. If it's this big, it tastes like water. Yeah. And exactly what phosphate does. We have an organic grocery store just down the street. I invite you to stop by People's Organic Market and have some real tomatoes. And then they also get gypsum. And so what do they do with the gypsum? And what they did in Florida is they built a huge dam with it and a big holding pond with the gypsum to hold the hydrofluorosilicic acid. And well, that kind of filled that up. So what else do we do with it? We put paper on either side of it and we call it drywall, and you build your house out of it. And so if you look at the three solutions they came up with for the phosphate fertilizer industry, they spread it thin and spread it far. Claim it's good and say goodbye. And that's what they're doing with it. Is it hydrofluorosilicic acid has no known benefit in human or any physiological system. It's not even useful in any mammal. So hydrofluorosilicic acid, adding that to the public water supply for an alleged benefit is a fraud, and it's a crime against the citizens of this country because it damages children and adults, and it's cumulative over a lifetime. It is a very noxious poison, and you do not have to take my word for it. If you've got a Webster's dictionary, open it up. One of the definitions is fluoride, a violent protoplasmic poison. Then you have to go look up protoplasm. We are protoplasm. So violent protoplasm for us. Say, let's put that in the water and see how the kids turn out. Hydrofluosilicic acid has a patent on it in the U.S. Patent Office for extracting lead from brass. So if you had a cannon left over from the Civil War, you could soak it in hydrofluosilicic acid and dissolve all the lead away from the copper and recover your copper. There is a nice new study where they exposed rats to lead, and it increased the level of lead in the rat's bloodstream by, say, 10. And then they added hydrofluosilicic acid to the rat's diet along with lead, and they went up 30. 3 times more than the rats that were exposed to lead alone. Exactly the same thing had previously been shown to occur in fluoridated communities that use hydrofluosilicic acid. Not natural fluoride, not sodium fluoride, hydrofluosilicic acid.
We hear a lot of aluminum being one of the fewer metals that can actually bypass the blood-brain barrier, and if you look at whatever research they give us, they equate, or they have a connection between aluminum and Alzheimer's, and it brought back memories of vaccinations and children. And if you look at an autistic child, a severe one, and someone with Alzheimer's, it's almost like there's this disconnect, and I'm wondering if it's related to the metals in our bodies. Is all these compounds neurologically disconnecting us? Because on the atomic level, you look at us, we're electrons and protons, we're all vibrations, everything and with matter is vibrating, and what is the best way to disrupt the vibration? I mean, all I can think of is putting a fork in a microwave and supposedly they blow up. So I mean, I would think, my thought process in this research has brought me to those conclusions. Now I'm just curious neurologically, I mean, what do you think?
Fluoride is very neurotoxic, and that so nobody in their right mind would tell their little kid to go brush with fluoride if they wanted the kid to turn out, intelligent. It's more toxic than lead, and just a hair less toxic than arsenic. If we measure your blood level of fluoride, half of your daily dose is coming from sources other than the water, and about half of it's the water. If we take the fluoridated toothpaste away, that lowers your total dose by about 50%. So about half of your body burden, your dose, is coming from the use of fluoridated dental products. Sadly, the dentists have begun to add fluoride to their filling materials, their cements, they even put a varnish on children's teeth. I don't believe these have been legitimately FDA approved. I've checked on them. There's no new drug applications on file for fluoride to be ingested, and none have been submitted. So if you're going to give a child a dose of fluoride, show me the FDA approval where that's beneficial and even safe. It doesn't exist. And yet we get a wink and a nod from the FDA on that. Oh, well, it's just a little deadly poison. So yes. FDA in 1997 required manufacturers of toothpaste to put this warning label on it. It's the same as you'd have on a loaded .38 caliber pistol. Keep out of reach of children. And only use a little pea-sized amount, which is about the same amount that would be in a bottle of water. And if that amount is swallowed, call the Poison Control Center or seek professional help immediately. So if I drink a bottle of water, should I call the Poison Control Center too? This is just insane. So this is what 2 different organizations say. One says, don't swallow it. Why did they put that on there? They put that on there because there were 10,000 calls a year to the Poison Control Centers from children made ill by swallowed toothpaste. 10,000 calls, and for every call there's 5 that didn't call. And there are only Poison Control Centers in half the states. So that means 100,000 children are made ill by swallowed toothpaste. It's insane to put a deadly poison in a child's hand and say, go brush and be sure and spit out, Johnny.
What bothers me is, as we've been purchasing bottles of water, because we actually contacted all these companies, and we stumbled across nursery water around since 1948. It's DS is the manufacturer of water company of America, and they produce these little baby bottles, fluoridated baby bottles of water for infants and newborns, and the whole thought process, and I brought this up to, actually, my brother-in-law was buying it for his newborn, and I said,
duh,
where are his teeth? why is it in the water? First of all, he said, listen, it's good for their teeth. I'm like, he's 3 months old. You know, because they're mixing with the, as you mentioned, with the, they're doing the worst thing they can and mixing it with
formula.
I don't understand that now. From what I would gather, that children don't really develop their teeth that they're gonna hold on to until they're 7, 8, 9, and 10 when they start losing the baby teeth. And but yet they're, is that true? I mean, is there any?
No, it's not true.
On some of these.
Let me clue you. The day that child is born, it's got all the parts it needs to be an adult. It's just they're babies, and so there is a set of teeth called baby teeth that is already forming, and the top of the permanent teeth at about 5 or 6 months is forming also. The old theory, based upon the mass murder of the Manhattan Project, was that the fluoride needed to be incorporated into the tooth matrix to make it strong. And I gave you the citation from the Center for Disease Control in 2001, said fluoride's effect are post-eruptive after the tooth comes in, and topical, like it has to contact it. So putting it in a baby bottle when the child doesn't have any visible teeth, there's no way on God's green earth that can have anything except a negative impact on that child. So how's the child's thyroid? Have you measured the blood level of fluoride in the infant? Have you measured their IQ? All the studies show that about a milligram, they've actually got it down to a 1 milligram dose of fluoride causes a 0.59 loss in IQ points. So you lose about a half an IQ point per milligram of dose a day. Well, that pea-sized amount's a milligram. A liter of water is another milligram. If you eat some of the contaminated, pesticide-contaminated foods, there's another 2 or 3 milligrams. So is it any wonder that children are having trouble learning to read and write? Then add to it the fact that hydrofluorosilicic acid sucks lead into these children's bodies. Herbert Needleman showed that only 50 parts per billion lead, or the blood level of lead of 10 micrograms per deciliter, was causing a decrement in IQ of 5. Well, think about that. That may not mean much to anybody that maybe has already had their fluoride dose, but the average IQ is 100. So if you're 95, you're in the back of the class napping because you can't understand what the person in the front is saying, and you're going to get a nice job pushing the broom around. So what if you got twice that dose? Okay, you're down to 90. So what they showed in studies in other countries is that you lose all your genius out of your society. You've damaged the intellect. Exactly the same thing happens with lead. We talked a minute ago about iodine. Iodine, if you were deficient in iodine, they used to call it cretinism. Well, now that's not a very politically correct term. You're not supposed to say that kid looks like a cretin. That was because they had behavior problems because their IQ is diminished. Well, that's iodine. So fluoride interferes with iodine. So you put all this together, you got fluoride, hydrofluorosilicic acid, sucking lead into the child, diminishing their available iodine, because iodine is then required to antidote the fluoride poisoning. So you get all three of those, damaging the intellect of the children, causing learning disorders and behavior problems. That's America today. Then what the schools do is they put them on handcuffs with prescription drugs. And so they put them on Ritalin, which is a fluorinated brain-damaging drug. So, oh, okay, these kids don't have a chance. This is just utterly insane. They have no reason to do it. It's like your brother feeding the kid fluoridated water. That shouldn't even be on the market. But how do you get it off the market? You have to have a lawyer that's also another brother-in-law and sue the FDA. And the FDA has been sued over this. And they said, well, you know, we're the FDA. We're so busy taking care of these other things. We can't really bother about that right now. And the Washington, D.C. courts keep saying, okay, sure, you're doing the best you can. I know that, you know, the budget deficit and all that. We only have 800 million people working that don't have anything to do in the government right now. So you're busy twiddling your thumbs and working on your retirement, and you can't regulate a deadly poison in the baby water? I'm sorry. I think you ought to prioritize things a little bit and quit worrying so much about the junkets that you're going on and the future job you're going to have with working for the big pharmaceutical company, and do the job that we're paying you to do. Otherwise, I can balance the budget. Yeah. I know how to save a couple $100,000 a year, get rid of each one of those guys out of there or girls out of there that's not doing their job, and get somebody in that will.
Right. And that's funny. It's one thing that I've recognized too in all industry. You have that revolving door between the public and the private sector. These guys going from the FDA, from Monsanto back in. You've got guys like Cheney with Halliburton and vice president. He's head of a corporation that profits from war. So I mean, you've always had this conflict of interest that I don't see. I don't understand how society doesn't see it.
Well, you know what a magnet is? Okay, well, where money and power are is a magnet to criminals. And so Washington, D.C. becomes a vortex of evil because all the people in the world that want to take your money and use it for themselves go to Washington, D.C. to figure out how to do that. They're passing laws right and left that protect industry from damaging to, I saw yesterday that they've just approved sugar beets to be genetically modified. How about the rest of us that don't want to have pig genes in our sugar beets? I mean, that you can't sell them in Europe. We're over there trying to lobby the Europeans saying how good our genetically modified food is, and they say, take a hike. Because they don't believe the lies coming out of our industry. But our industry has the ability to buy all the politicians they possibly can want. And I think what we need to do, the long-term solution to this problem, is we need to tell industry that they may work in our country, they may produce products in our country, they can employ citizens in our country, but when they injure the citizens intentionally in order to improve their products, then we have a banishment. Sharia law, you can no longer be in this country and sell and make all the money in the world because we are the biggest consumer. So if you are an industry and you cheat and hurt our children, you shouldn't be allowed to be here.
What's the best way to get to them? And people ask me this all the time, and the only thing I can come up with is consumerism. Buy something else.
Thank God for the Egyptians. What they showed was you can have the nastiest, meanest, totalitarian government, and enough of us get off of our fat buffs and get out into the square and say, we want this jerk to go. It took him 30 years, but you know what? I bet you he goes. He's done. And that's because even without a democracy, if you're willing to go out and die for your cause, that eventually you get to win. We call that the revolution. And the citizens of the United States, and the Kennedy brothers were there, defeated the strongest country on the world in 1776. It took us, 7 years? And then we had to fight them again in 1811. So we defeated them twice. And finally they said, well, okay.
I heard that was all about banking, centralized banking, trying to get back into our country.
Well, it's taxes.
Yeah.
It wasn't about centralized. Oh, the one at 18.
What the taxes are though?
The one 1812 or the one 1776?
Well, the 1812.
1812 was specifically over you've heard of being shanghaied?
Yeah.
Well, that means if you were an American and you happen to sail into China to do business and unload your ship and get some more, the British soldiers would capture American sailors and say, well, you're really British citizens, you should serve on our military ships, and you got shanghaied. They took you as prisoner and made you a slave on their ships. And we told them to stop, and they said, no, well, you're really just a disgruntled colony, and we're going to continue to snatch your soldiers. So we fought them again. And the fun thing is the best battle of the War of 1812 was fought after the war was over, because communications, they didn't have Twitter. Yeah. And Andy Jackson walked from the north all the way down through the south, and one of the things that Davy Crockett showed you is that if you extended the barrel of the gun and you rifled the bullet, it went true. Yeah. And so you could shoot a quarter or half mile. Everybody saw Quigley Down Under. Mm-hmm. So here are all these Kentucky and Tennessee and long riflemen, and Andy Jackson took them down to New Orleans, and they had the pirate Lafitte, who was hiding and shaking in New Orleans because he didn't want to go out there where the British were, because they had the big men of war out there. They were going to blow them up. And so Andy said, well, how about we borrow your cannon? And Lafitte says, bien sûr. And so they carried all the cannon off of his ship and set it up on a field called Calumet, which is a cotton field, and they'd left the cotton in the field. So there's this great big giant bale of cotton, and they have ditches in the field to drain it, because it was right down in New Orleans, it's to drain it. And so all of Andy's long riflemen got in and they were standing up behind these nice cotton bales, and they could set that nice long rifle on top of that cotton bale, put a little ball of spit on there, and they got so when the British saw the cannon on the high point here, the great captain of the ship said, take her out. And they took her out another mile or two, and then they put all the Marines in their little boats and said, okay, take them in. And they sit there rowing like this and rowing like this, and the guys behind the barrels of, or the bales of cotton began to take bets on how many you could get with one shot. And so they sit there and they'd say, oh, bet a little more powder there, you get that ball to go a little faster, okay. And all right, that was, the one's on the right's mine. And they were getting 2 and 3 at a time because the ball would go pop, pop, because they're rowing right toward them.
Yeah, right.
They never got to shore. They never got to shore. And so that really taught the British is that you can't defeat a well-armed citizenry. And that's what all governments fear, is that the citizens will stand up and tell them that, you know, we're tired of you cheating and stealing and taking somebody else's money to damage our children. And that you lose your franchise as a governance if you don't do good governance. And that the addition of fluoride to the water supply cannot be justified by anybody. And you know how you can tell that? They will not openly debate the issue. They say it's already been decided. Great. Then you probably have the data on how many children have high blood levels of lead because of hydrofluorosilicic acid. Oh, you can't prove that caused this. No, actually we have proven that caused this. So I want to know what your data shows. Oh, you're just an anti-fluoridationist. So what is that? That's PR. Denigrate the source. Oh, I'm an anti-fluoridationist. I think we should save the children from swallowing hydrofluorosilicic acid and raising their blood level of lead, so I'm bad. No, I think the people trying to put it in the water, or actually who have succeeded in putting it in our water, are bad. When I was a kid, I went to a one-room schoolhouse. I can tell you, every child in that room knew how to read. And how do I know that? Because every darn day, you had to stand up with a little book and say, see Tom run, see Spot run, yada, yada, yada. And every kid could read. We can't do that today because they're brain damaged. There have only been 2 presidential candidates in the last 60 years that have not favored fluoridation.
And who are they?
Can you think of who they might be?
I'm going to have to say Kennedy.
Ron Paul would have to be one.
There you go, Ron Paul's one.
Have to be one of them.
Candidates?
Candidates, they didn't get elected.
All right, okay.
Oh, so both of them didn't get elected.
Both of them did not get elected.
Ron Paul and, oh man, I don't know.
I don't know. Tell us.
Try Ralph Nader.
Nader.
Really?
So, because he knows it's not for the little kiddies, it's for industry.
Right.
Give us your water supply. We got some stuff we want to poop in it.
So you agree it's by design?
It's actually there. It's proclamations from the Center for Disease Control about how good it is and how we're going to fluoridate the entire country. It's not by design. It's an organized program that is costing us millions of dollars a year. Water fluoridation is an organized program. It's actually a goal that these 38 people at the Center for Disease Control have established as their goal is to fluoridate every single drop of water in this entire country. It's ridiculous. It's going to cause, and it has caused, harm. Those people should be fired. Long ago, they had enough evidence in their hands, and their 2001 CDC report proves it. They acknowledge its effects are topical and after the tooth is in the mouth. And the level in saliva is too low to have a measurable impact. So why are we letting them do it? They admitted they're cheating, so I think it's time for them to stop. It's a decade later. Thank you for making this video.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Thank you for taking the time to sit down.
Oh, anytime. I've done nothing but take time on this
issue.
issue.
Why are these people out of power? How are they?
Because you haven't run for office yet.
So talk about that.
Let me ask you this real quick.
Well, because money is why people get elected.
Right.
If you came out with an attitude that water fluoridation was not a good idea, matter of fact, this happened. Helix Water Districts in San Diego looked at the fluoride issue. They said, well, we're reluctant to add this chemical to our water supply, and they didn't. They were supposedly mandated by the laws here in California, and they didn't for years. So the California Dental Association, interested in having their favorite toxic waste in the water supply, interfered in the election of the water board members, and they elected pro-fluoride water members. And then what did they do? They said, oh yeah, this elixir from the phosphate fertilizer industry would be wonderful, the little kiddies. And they put it in the water. So it's money manipulating elections for the benefit of a third party, not the recipient of the hydrofluorosilicic acid, but the third party is the one getting rid of the hydrofluorosilicic acid. If you look at this country 50 years ago, we were the engine that drove the world out of the poverty from the recession and the devastation of World War II. We're the ones that sucked them back up into the affluent world you see today. And what are we doing? We're killing it. Because if you kill the kids, you kill your country. And so when you damage the IQ of the children, you put them in remedial education and they can't figure out how to read and write and they can't add and they can't subtract and they're having trouble and they become violent and aggressive, kill each other and drive-by shootings and gangs and stuff like that, you lose your place in the country as a leader, and we have. And that's because of the damage that our government has allowed to happen to the intelligence of our children. It's not rocket science. It's really simple. If you put a neurotoxin in the water that sucks lead into the baby, then you end up with a baby that has lead and fluoride poison. If you don't supplement with iodine, which none of our water supplies do, and they tried it, and some people were sensitive to it. You know what? A lot of us are sensitive to fluoride for exactly the same reason.
So what forms of chelation, like how, now that we know we have this problem, we know we're loaded with these toxins, what do you suggest as far as natural or, chelation therapies, getting it out? How do we get it out?
Okay, at the present time, we know of nothing that will chelate fluoride out of your body. What we can show is in human epidemiological studies, the amount in your bones continues to increase throughout your lifetime. Right. So whatever those people are doing, it's not getting it out, it's going up. So you have to look at this as if you have a lifetime body burden, and the less you're exposed to, the longer you can go before you develop symptoms. The first most irrefutable symptom of fluoride exposure is pain. And that's what we saw. My wife and I filmed a documentary in China. And pain was the hugely significant symptom that they all had. They couldn't even work. And in China, if you don't work, you starve to death.
Osteoporosis, was it joints, was it just physical?
It's osteofluorosis. It's joint and muscle pain, because what happens is the bone fills up with fluoride. Right. And as one guy, his dentist gave him a high-strength fluoride mouthwash, and he said his bones felt like they were on fire, and that's because they're filling up with fluoride. And then what it does once it fills up with fluoride, that you get little spikes on the outside of the bone. If you take a hand and take a bone and run your hand up and down a normal bone, it's slick, and that's because muscles move around on the bones when you're running or jogging or lifting weights and all that stuff. Your muscles are moving around on your bone, and it's slick, so it doesn't hurt. Well, if you make that bone the texture of sandpaper, then when the muscle moves around, the fascia tears, and it hurts to move. And so fluoride accumulates in calcium-rich tissues, which are bone, ligaments, cartilage, joints, and teeth. But what does it do in teeth? The more fluoride in the tooth, the more brittle the tooth becomes. So if you're a dentist, it's really good for business because teeth break all the time, and then you have to put crowns and stuff like that on it. If you expose a baby to fluoride, the tooth comes in with holes in it. It's called porosity, and that's why they turn brown, because it actually makes the tooth weaker and porous. So it is a total myth that fluoride is of any benefit in the oral health of children. There are so many substances that are safe for the children to swallow that work so much better that it is insane to have aisles of this in every grocery store. It's marketing, it's not sane. And it's marketing because the dentists don't know any better. They believe the stuff in the ads.
And that's what they're taught. I mean,
Exactly.
Look at the American Mental Association. When somebody's going through, their course studies to be a physician, they don't even teach nutrition. It's an elective. It's not even, from what I understand.
Well, they have a 1-hour course in nutrition at UCSD, the local school. And one of the things that the professor teaches them, that the Twinkie is no different than a baked potato. It's merely a collection of carbohydrates and fats, and that there's no difference whatsoever. With that kind of education, is it any wonder that physicians don't know nothing?
I've even looked into, Carnegie and the Rockefeller Institution and how they've set up every, medical, you know, everything from pharmaceuticals to the medical industry to what's taught.
So what the commonality is we can find in all of this is money, 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 and that's the crime, is that we're really about people, and if they're about money, then we have a conflict of interest. Is it we want our children to grow up healthy and strong, and they want to make profits. So that makes it a difficult issue. And that I think as citizens we need to take back our country and run it for the benefit of our children and the benefit of future residents of this country, and rather than for the benefit of industry. I like industry. I support them any way I can, but I don't think I need to give my water supply over to industry for their convenient waste disposal problems. And medical schools don't teach physicians to look in the mouth. And if you go to a physician and ask him, well, what do you think about this water fluoridation? He'd say, well, my dentist says it's okay. Well, I'm sorry. Did you not go to school and learn how to evaluate data? How about the National Academies of Science review in 2006 that found the EPA's maximum contaminant level goal? They voted unanimously to reject it as safe for the population. And then they went on to cite study after study after study where infinitesimal exposures to fluoride caused harm, especially to infants. Well, don't physicians know how to read? I thought that was a requirement.
I'm sorry I laugh. It's
no, it's okay.
absurd.
It's intended to be humorous. So let me go on to another subject that you broached earlier.
Yes.
Alzheimer's, autism. The fellow that said aluminum was causing Alzheimer's disease has retracted that and said that that was an error. Is it when, on the other hand, the fellow that said mercury is causing Alzheimer's disease has not retracted that at all. As a matter of fact, there are a whole series of studies now, and including a huge review paper, and you can find it under Mutter, M-U-T-T-E-R, published about a month ago, that reviewed over 1,000 studies of Alzheimer's, and that they came to the conclusion that mercury appears to be causal. It takes a lot to get a scientist to say that caused this. But what they're saying is mercury appears to be causal of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is going to bankrupt this country. 1 out of 10 people are going to get it. And I'll tell you, if you look at the cost of taking care of even one Alzheimer's patient, it dwarfs the cost of dental care for the population. It's not even in the ballpark, because Alzheimer's is when you have a warm, loving human being who's lost all memory and can't care for themselves. That's a terrible disorder. How did it happen? Mercury is a perfect pesticide for man. There's a video, it's called How Mercury Causes Neurodegeneration. Brain is a neuro, and degeneration means it shrivels. And they were able to create all 7 of the hallmark diagnostic signs of Alzheimer's disease in animals by having them inhale mercury. They tried it by injecting with mercury, it didn't happen. Tried it by feeding them mercury, it didn't happen. Had them inhale mercury, it happened. They developed all 7 of the hallmark diagnostic signs of Alzheimer's disease. And there's a little video on YouTube, you can watch it. It's how mercury causes neurodegeneration. That under a microscope, here's a cell culture with nerves growing, and they put in a little teeny drop of mercury, and all of a sudden the tubulin, which is the insulation on the wire, falls off, turns into a blob on the body of the cell, and the nerves all tangled up. Well, your lights wouldn't come on in your house if you had bare wires all tangled up, and you know what? The lights aren't on the Alzheimer's victims either. And the reason is the number of fillings in their teeth, and that there are other sources of mercury. So you can get Alzheimer's from other causes as long as you're exposed to mercury for some reason. What they've also found is concurrent exposure to lead greatly accelerates the mercury injury, and shortage of selenium. Selenium is part of the antidote to mercury poisoning. So you have now 3 different metals, lead, mercury, and selenium. Selenium's protective. Lead and mercury are synergistic. They cause more harm. So if you take an infinitesimal exposure to lead that wouldn't kill even 1 of the rats, and an infinitesimal exposure to mercury that would kill maybe 1 out of 100 rats, it kills all the rats. Those 2 work together to cause terrible, devastating illness in animals. It's happening in humans too. Hydrofluorosilicic acid causes lead to suck into children.
Other than allogram fillings with the mercury. How else could somebody be exposed to mercury poisoning? Like,
Well, I can think of the security guard there in Kansas City, and not Kansas City, in Detroit, that stole some old amalgams and put them in a frying pan with a blowtorch. He was going to get rich selling the silver, and he killed himself and his wife and his family. They had to tear the whole house down and put it in a barrel and take it away. The other way, there's a big push that everybody should get these these high-cost, low-energy light bulbs that are fluorescent lights. Well, a young lady bought one of those at her Home Depot store, and she went home and she screwed it in. And when she screwed it in, it broke, and the mercury flopped out on the ground there, or inside her house. And so she called Home Depot, and they said, well, you should call it hazmat. And she called hazmat, and the guys came in the white suit, and they all had on respirators that looked like this, which your dentist really should be wearing. And they started cleaning. Let me get that out where you can see it. Yeah. And so they cleaned it up, and they sent her a bill for $2,000. Do you think she saved a lot of money on that? So that's a milligram of mercury. They charged her $2,000 to clean it up. There's 750 milligrams in an average filling. So 750 times more than in your light bulb. But that light bulb could break in the couch, and maybe you just leave it there and put the baby down for a nap. You don't know where this stuff is. You broke a thermometer in the carpet in 1970. It's still leaking out of that carpet. Is that there's enough mercury in a thermometer to kill everybody that's sitting here. There's a huge amount of mercury already in our environment, and the United Nations has responsibly taken actions to begin to prohibit the sale and distribution of mercury, because when we take mercury and recycle it, what do we do with it? We give it sell it to the Indians in the Amazon to do gold mining, and it destroys the Amazon, the lungs of the planet. We've got the Native Americans down there panning for gold using mercury, making a big mess out of it, just like we did in Nevada and California. You can't eat the fish out of most of California's streams because they're so high in mercury.
They tell pregnant women not to even eat fish.
Well, duh.
Right.
Well, just us old guys can have it, right? You can't tell if we're crazy.
There's something I wanted to point out to you here is Washington Post, and I believe this was in 2009. Study finds high fructose corn syrup contains mercury. Fox News, study finds high fructose, again, contains mercury, again. This came out in 2009.
And who did the study?
Well, I mean, this...
It wasn't a government study.
No, it definitely wasn't a government study. I mean,
So here we are selling... Well, I don't, it's like Mayor Golddigger said about the reverse osmosis, it won't affect me. Well, it won't affect me because I don't eat high fructose corn syrup, because I think it's terrible stuff. Shouldn't be on the market anyway. But
did you hear the FDA's changing the name, though, to corn sugar?
Oh, there we go.
It's there's another manipulation there. Instead of
calling it hydrofluorosic acid, which the liars can't pronounce, they call it fluoride. It's good for the kiddies. Yeah. So there's a name change. So by changing the name, did you make the devil Beelzebub? Hey, B, how you doing? It's still bad.
Right.
It's not going to get any better. Here's what the hazmat people are supposed to be wearing, and your dentist should too. It's called a Mine Safety Association, MSA. It has filters, has a small particle filter that goes over here, and it has a color change dot. If this mask is ever exposed to mercury, that dot changes to brown. And what you do is you flee the area, take a shower, get a new hazmat suit, new mask, and come back and clean up the mess. That's how your dentist should be working. Some are, most are not. And as a result, dentists and their staff end up with mercury-related illnesses, particularly infertility, birth defects. And there's a new one. They just showed that if a woman has mercury fillings placed during her first trimester of pregnancy, she's much more likely, I think it was 6-fold more likely, to have a baby born with a neurotube defect, cleft lip, cleft palate. Okay. So that's what you can thank your dentist for.
What about now, what about the relation to the thyroid? We're hearing a lot of thyroid issues and diseases, and what are your thoughts on that?
When Mayor Golddigger said that water fluoridation wouldn't affect her because she has reverse osmosis, there's two things wrong with that. Is that one, the vast majority of reverse osmosis systems don't remove fluoride from the water, And the other is that fluoride absorbs through the skin at a very high rate. In fact, in the 30s and 40s, if you had a thyroid that was overactive, what did they do? They had you take a bath in fluoridated water, and that suppressed your thyroid. 20 minutes of soaking once a week, and all of a sudden your thyroid doesn't work anymore. So how about a shower every day? Well, that would probably inhibit thyroid function, especially in an iodine deficient area. And so we have in America today all of the symptoms of hypothyroidism, obesity, heart disease, neurological impairment. So just thinking you can protect yourself by getting some kind of filter for your drinking water is not logical. A, you're going to have to bathe in something, and B, if you don't protect everyone's children, they end up stupid, buy a gun, rob the 7-Eleven, and randomly shoot holes in people. That's what happens if you don't protect all the children, let them grow up to the vibrant, healthy, intelligent people this country once used to produce, and it doesn't anymore because we're damaging the children, and it needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. It's really clear, every scientist will agree with me, it's just the bureaucrats and the politicians who do not, and there are some scientists that I must say have developed a certain penchant for income who will do what industry pays them to. So when you see stuff published that says fluoride is really good, be sure and look and see who funded that. Because all the studies that say fluoride is really bad come either from independent researchers or from other countries. Submit a proposal to the government that you want to study the neurological impact of toothpaste and fluoridated water on children, and you'll get your application back. Says, oh, we're really busy. We can't really study that right now. No, we don't. You know, yeah. Oh, what makes you think we want to know about that?
So what do you think? I mean, as a consumer, I mean, what can we do? Write to our congressman? I mean, is it something as simple as that? I mean, it sounds like there really isn't much we can do as far as removing it from our water. I mean, you can't boil it out.
Boil it makes it worse.
It makes it worse, right?
Yeah.
So
I
never knew that. I mean, I knew you couldn't boil it out, but you said boiling makes it
worse. Understand that when you raise the temperature in the water, water comes off. The minerals stay in. You know, you've put a pot on the stove and went away and watched a movie and said, oh yeah, I forgot to look at it. You come back and there's all this crusty stuff on the bottom of the pot. Well, that's all the fluoride. And so when you start out, say you're going to make soup and you put it.
Distilling work with distilled water?
The steam coming off is free of fluoride, yes.
But isn't that what distilled water is when you
Exactly, or rainwater. Right. You know, as Cat Stevens said, snowmen sleep in the sea. Well, what's he talking about? Yeah. The rain that's landing on our country today is evaporating off the oceans out here. Yesterday, goes up in the ionosphere, gets hit with that cold northern air, and it drops down on the ground. Right. And so that's why snowmen sleep in the sea. That's also why the ocean is fairly salty, because it keeps evaporating away and the minerals stay in the water.
It's getting saltier and saltier.
Exactly. It's the mineral. It's also got fluoride in it. That's one of their arguments. Well, the ocean, it's got about 1 part per million fluoride in it anyway. It must be okay for the whales. Yeah. Well, if you cut them up, you'll find a huge amount of fluoride in the bones. Matter of fact, you look at the FDA, one of the things they told you is not to eat the fish bones, because that's what the fish has done with it. Same thing humans do it, they park it in the bones. Right. That doesn't mean that it's a good thing for the fish, that means the fish has learned to deal with it. It's like mercury. They tell you not to eat the fish because the mercury's in there, the fish is doing okay. Well, the fish has a brain about the size of a pea. You got one that's a little bigger than that. So you got a lot more to lose than the fish does, and so how can you tell if you got a stupid fish? You know, the seagull eats it.
Right. What naturally is supposed to be there? I understand you mentioned that the ocean is 1 part per million. I would imagine we had some influence on that. Industry did anyway. So what prior to that was intended for us?
If you roll the clock back, you have about 200 parts per million fluoride in your bones. And if you live in a Florida community for 20 years, you have 5,000. This toothpaste is only 1,000. So we've completely changed the level of exposure that you were vicariously exposed to through intermittent exposure from anthropomorphic exposure. From exposure to in the environment is entirely different than what we're talking about. What we're talking about, First off, you have to understand what a xenobiotic is. A xenobiotic is a poison that has no use in the body at all. There are some things that can kill you that are useful. Selenium, for example. Selenium is very effective in helping you detox both mercury and fluoride, but if you get too much, you get selenium poisoning. So here's a nutrient that just the right amount is essential. Too little, you get cancer. Too much, you get selenium poisoning. You want to be right in the middle. That's a nutrient. Fluoride is not a nutrient. Fluoride is a poison. So the least amount of the exposure to this is the better. Lead, least amount of exposure. The EPA's public health goal is 0 for lead. Arsenic, 0. Those are xenobiotics. So the less exposure you have, the better off you are. When they do autopsies on people, they find that the amount of fluoride in the bone is proportional to the domicile that they lived in and whether there was a fluoridated community or not. And they don't have to go look and see if you drank bottled water. It's proportional to whether or not you lived in a fluoridated community. Because if you go out to Felipe's and eat the pasta, you're getting a cup of fluoridated water with your pasta. If you go to the Hong Kong Chinese restaurant, you're getting a cup of water with the rice. So if you live in a fluoridated community, you're eating it when you eat at a restaurant, unless you have bottled water piped into your house for your shower. You're getting it whenever you take a shower. And so there is no way to avoid exposure if it's in your local public water supply. And they say, oh, that way it's evenly spread throughout society. Not true. It's evenly spread, disevenly spread, because babies get a lot more than adults, and it poisons them faster.
Just on their mere size alone.
Well, they drink water. That's what a baby drinks. Its entire nutrient base is based upon a fluid. If it's a lucky little baby, it gets to do nursing. If it's not so lucky, it gets a bottle. And so if that bottle is made up with tap water, the level of fluoride in the tap water is 4 to 5 times above the level that's known to cause harm, and it's 500 times above the level that will injure an iodine deficient infant. It's not even in the ballpark. They did autopsies on people and they looked at the amount of mercury in their brain, because the bone is the reservoir for fluoride, the brain is the reservoir for mercury, and kidney. And so they found that the amount of mercury in your brain the day you die is proportional to the number of mercury fillings in your teeth. The amount of fluoride in your bones is proportional to the water supplies and the use of dental hygiene products for a lifetime.
Wow. So there are some things we can do.
Well, let me tell you what you can. See, in some ways I'm kind of reluctant to tell you what you can do, because I know. But I'm kind of reluctant because I don't want you to just say, well, in that case, I'll do that and screw the rest of the people.
Right.
But, because that's what a lot of people do. And I don't think they can call themselves Americans. They can't call themselves patriots for any reason I can think of, because all they're doing is protecting themselves and collecting the manna from our wonderful country, and they're not protecting the kids so that their next generation is going to lose out. But since you asked, I'll tell you that the antidote to fluoride poisoning is calcium, magnesium, vitamin C, selenium, and iodine. So if you increased all of your intake in those nutrients and minimized your exposure to fluoride or fluoride from water, then you could mitigate the damage. We talked earlier about chelation. You're not going to chelate it out, but you can mitigate the damage. And that's what they've shown in a number of studies in animals and humans, is that if you get adequate amounts of these nutrients, calcium, magnesium, vitamin C, selenium, and iodine, into your body on a regular basis, your body tends to, and totally avoid exposure to fluoride, and that's hard to do. It snots over these rough bones and begins to make them smooth, so the pain begins to go down. And that's what the people in China, when we interviewed them, they said is that when they got good water, is that it took years. This is 20 years later, but over the 20-year period, the pain had diminished remarkably. So it goes from a stabbing, sharp, terrible pain to kind of a dull ache. Right. So you can mitigate the damage. You can't get rid of it. You can't get over it. But you can't get rid of it, but you can get over it. How's that? Lots of communities, not only successful in removing the fluoride, but even many of them have been successful in keeping it from being put in their water. San Diego is a perfect example. The city council voted in 1952 to put hydrofluosilicic acid in our water supply. The citizens walked around and they said, we don't think that's a good idea, and we passed a law that says no fluoride or fluorine-containing substance or hydrofluoric acid, or a fluoride-containing substance can be added to the public water supply. There can be no gift of funds, no tax, and no water bill levied for that purpose. And it's ordinance number 67 in the San Diego Municipal Code.
It still stands?
It still stands today, and what we have is a bunch of crooks and thieves in downtown City Hall, and they decided, well, you know, that's such an old law. Mayor Golddigger actually said that's such an old law. Well, you know, let's see, the Constitution is 200 years old. Shall we throw that out too, Mayor? We shot a documentary on how fluoride crippled people in China, and that the government of China has had a very effective program of defluoridating their country. Natural fluoride destroys people's lives, and that's what they found, is that the areas of intense poverty in China, where, I mean, they're living in mud huts made out of stick, and those are areas of high fluoride because they end up with all this joint pain. They can't go work the fields. Even the burros end up poisoned. So the government found it was economically viable for them to come in and get new wells that went down beyond the high fluoride water, so that the people could have good water to drink, so that the animal didn't get poisoned and the children didn't get poisoned, so they could farm the fields and make a living. And they went and showed me the villages. And you can go to a village that has good water, and there's decent houses and happy, friendly little children in the schools. And you go to a village where there's still high fluoride in the water. They didn't fix all the villages. And the kids are, they're just, it's so painfully obvious. I just feel sorry for the kids. These kids are damaged by the well water that's out of those villages. We went around and measured the well water, and it was bad. But
is there a test that you can do to measure these levels, like that anybody, a consumer, might be able to get? Just to, let's say almost like a pH test they do on their water. That would show elements, trace elements?
We took with us in our documentary in China a little fluoride tester from the Lamotte, L-A-M-O-T-T-E, Lamotte company. And there's two kinds. One is the color emitter, and it uses arsenic as spadens is what it's called. And the other, the same company has since miniaturized the ion-specific electrode. I bought one of those years ago, which was like, you know, $1,500, and it was like big as a TV set, you know. and so the thing now is down to about the size of a cigarette pack, you know. So they really miniaturized it. It still does exactly the same thing. So you need a standard. So you need to have a little bottle of 1 part per million fluoride. You go in here and it should say 1. If it does, okay. Stick it in a bunch of other stuff. That's a nice little toy. It'll cost you about $200, and you can measure every drop of water that comes anywhere near you. Maybe I'll loan you mine.
Yeah, we're budgeting. We gotta get one. But that's. And can you just say, what was that tester again? I know you said Lamont is the company.
Lamont, it's called an ion-specific electrode. If you were to go to a chemistry lab and say, I'd like to measure the fluoride level in this product, they would fire up their ion-specific electrode and measure it. What it is an electronic pH meter. You can measure pH by electricity. And so on the end of it, they have an electrode that only lets fluoride impact the pH. And so when you put it in 1 ppm fluoride water, it says 1. Okay, so that's your standard. So they basically put it in distilled water, it should say 0. Put it over here, it says 1. So there's your log scale. There's 0, and here's 1. So that's your log scale. And the next one's 10. And so then you can take that and poke it into everything else that comes by you all day long, and it'll tell you exactly how much fluoride is. But they wouldn't like you to know that, though, because, you know, it's better to have it odorless, colorless, tasteless.
Yeah, right.
And so that way you don't know you're being poisoned.
You brought a bottle out earlier, and I think it was from another country, and you were speaking earlier about labeling. And I was wondering if you might be able to just touch on the differences between, you know, what occurs here in the United States as far as labeling. And I noticed it's Nestle Corporation, and from what I understand, they're one of the largest. But I think you had mentioned that in other countries, they'll list every element, or maybe elaborate on that. And we'll actually, Paul, maybe you can get a long lens and get a close-up.
No, better yet, we get a short lens and get a close-up.
Yeah, get a nice one, right?
Yeah. Well, I just picked this up as an example when I was down in Cabo San Lucas a few months ago, and you can see it. It's a bottled water made by Nestle's, and then if you got really good eyesight and you get your magnifying glass out over here, you can see that you know, they tell you the total dissolved solids and its electrical conductance, its pH, It has the elements of calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium bicarbonate, chlorine, nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, and bicarbonate. So, and no fluoride in there. See, that's the deal. And so you can go to Italy, Germany, France, Holland, Denmark, anywhere in the world except America, and pick up a bottle, and they'll tell you what's in it. But in America, we'll tell you how much fat there is in it. It's just insane. And you don't have to believe me. We'll put these on a scanner, and you can have them all. Here's San Benedetto from Italy that has bicarbonate, calcio, magnesio, silica. They even tell you how much sand there is in it now. And here's fluoride at 0.06. So
that's low. That's somewhat low.
that would be, I'd drink that. As a matter of fact, I did. That's how come I got that label.
That's the bottom. That's the bottom one. You see it?
Yeah. And 0.06 is just about the level of fluoride you'll find in breast milk if you're poisoning the mother to death with fluoride. Okay. And look here, breastfeeding tied to intelligence. In a large randomized trial of human lactation, researchers have found that the prolonged breastfeeding is associated with improved intelligence. Ha! I wonder why. And so,
you know, did you hear about the most recent report? You know, where the standard, I guess, for the fluoride levels since 1962 supposedly have been 0.7 to 0.12, and now the
1.2.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, 1.2, and now the federal government is now leaning to get everybody over to the 0.7. But if you look at the EPA, and this is what I thought was confusing, right on their website, their safety measurement is 4.0.
Yeah, and they asked the National Academy of Sciences that was safe in 2006. All 12 members of the committee said no. Okay. So what they're doing now, and this, so that you understand, 0.7 is not going to solve the problem, because you can do the math on a baby. 0.7 is going to poison the baby. Not quite as fast as 1 did, but 0.7 is still going to poison the baby because the dose exceeds the dose that's known to cause harm. And you know what the next dirty trick they're trying to do? They're raising the EPA's estimate of the dose that causes harm. I'm sorry, didn't we just figure out that there's a bunch of children with funny looking spotted teeth and we needed to lower their exposure, and you're going to raise it? Right. That's going the wrong way. So we can go get some water that's from Greece, and it tells you calcium, sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium, iron, chlorine, carbon dioxide, and there's no fluoride in this water. That's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Aqua Panna from, where is that? Italy. And fluoride is 0.1, about the same as...
is it 1.0 or is it 0.1?
0.1.
0.1, okay.
The 1/10 of what the alleged beneficial level is. And I would drink that.
That's it. What's the alleged beneficial level?
Alleged beneficial level, well, I say alleged because it keeps changing.
Right.
And you know, if it's really used to be good at 1 and now it's really good at 0.7, you know, when they keep moving the numbers around like that, you know they're lying. Mm-hmm. And you know how you can tell they're not lying? How can you tell they're lying?
When they don't look you in the eye?
No, their lips are moving. So here's Primavera from Italy again, and it's got bicarbonate, sulfates, chlorine, calcium, magnesium, sodium, silica, and no fluoride in it. Because they know people don't want to be drinking fluoride. So if you were in Italy or Europe or someplace else where they actually had reasonable labels on their water, they'd tell you what's in it. Mm-hmm. Here they pretend like it doesn't exist. You can get Poland Springs, and all it does is say since 1845 our natural spring water has been wonderful and good and all that stuff. And they forgot to mention if there was anything in it. That's marketing, isn't it?
Yeah. So we understand that Europe is 98% fluoride free, right?
Only place that still has fluoride, well, there's two. There are a few places in Europe that still have fluoride in water supplies. One is in Italy, in a little town called Diente Negro, which means black tooth.
Is that right?
So you can kind of understand what's happening to the Italians there. So if your teeth end up about the color of your shoe, then you're probably there in Diente Negro. And there is an experiment that's still ongoing in Spain, I believe, in one town. The experiments have been terminated in Switzerland and Kuopio, Finland. Kuopio, Finland stopped their experiment when bone cancers were found in American children. And in California, the bone cancer was the one that triggered the Prop 65 Cancer Nomination Committee to put fluoride in its salts, leapfrog over some 34 other chemicals and put it on the top of the list. Fluoride in its salts, well, hydrofluorosilicic acid is the salt of fluoride, and it's linked to a whole host of cancers, and now bone cancer. And it's just in males. And so it's, you know, when the little short guy, you remember when you were 5 or 6 years old and then you saw your grandmother a couple years later and you said, oh, you've grown a whole foot. Well, you did. Yeah. And so when your bones are rapidly growing, fluoride triggers an osteosarcoma. And that's what Elise Basson did in a case-controlled study. National Academy of Science, in their 2006 review, the Basson study was completed in 2001 and then hidden in the library under rare books at Harvard until my friend Paul and Michael Conant went and got it out. They wouldn't let them make a copy of it. So they said, it's a PhD thesis. She got her PhD. How come we can't copy it? It's a rare book. We got to keep it in here so that people don't find it. So they said, can I make 10 pages? And so they made 10 pages, and Paul made 10 pages, and Michael came back. And so they ended up being able to deliver this PhD thesis to the National Academy of Science. It had been peer reviewed because she got her PhD, right? But it hadn't been published. So they said it is a likely carcinogen as opposed to saying frank carcinogen. But by the time in 2009, when the Cancer Nomination Committee for the Prop 65 was required by law to include fluoride in it because it does all the things. We have a very, very clear law here in California that if something causes abnormal chromosome changes in cell cultures that look like it's a carcinogen, that's one mark against it. If you have animal studies that when you expose them to this substance, they get cancer, that's 2 marks against it. And then when you have epidemiological studies showing that humans exposed to this substance get cancer, that's 3 marks against it. Fluoride passed all 3 tests without any difficulty whatsoever. So they had to nominate it. The question remains is, will the label that says this product contains fluoride, which is known to the state of California to cause cancer, appear on bottled water? And the problem is, after the Cancer Nomination Committee put fluoride on its highest list, the American Dental Association sent $200,000 to the California Dental Association to thwart that ruling. Well, wait a minute, the science is done. What could they possibly use $200,000 for? That would be for political purposes.
Right. They can't undo the science.
No, they can't put the rats back to life. Yes.
We know how bad it all is. Everybody knows it's been pretty bad for quite some time. Why are we doing it? I mean,
no, not why. Because you'd have to look at politics and crooks and criminals and money changing hands and oh, I've just made a little video. It's called The Secret Story of Fluoride that goes into some detail about the Manhattan Project and how they had a terrible problem with it and it was causing neurological impairment in the workers. And Harold Hodge says, well, this is a place only people of color should work. His solution to a neurotoxic drug is put the African Americans there to work on it. Right. And then, you know, when they lost all their teeth, that became a scientific report about how good it was for you because they said the tooth decay went down. You know, if your teeth fall out, you don't have as many cavities. So that was published in the Journal of the American Dental Association, 1948. It wasn't found out until 1995. Top secret only lasts for 50 years. So in 1995, the top secret came off the data, and the reason the tooth decay went down was because their teeth fell out. So this was part of the lie that started clear back in the 30s. There was a Killing Fog of Denora, and you can read Christopher Bryson's wonderful book called The Fluoride Deception, and he goes through how the United States Public Health Service went in and said, no, it wasn't fluoride, it was thick air. Autopsy showed it was fluoride, but the government began the denial for the industry because there were 3 smelters of zinc in that little valley. It was a company town, and the chimney spewed so much fluoride out it killed the people of the town when they got a temperature inversion. And the U.S. government went in and started lying to the people in the 30s, and they're still doing it today. So how do we make them stop? You call them on their lie. The courts have ruled that elected officials have the right to do this, even if it causes harm. 3 different court trials have found that it aggravates existing illness, increases cancer death rates, and it was not beneficial. But the Supreme Courts of 3 different states allowed elected officials to do that because they're imbued with the power of the police power of government. So if they feel it's necessary to shoot you, they can, because they're the deciders. So that means, as a citizen, our only choice is to remove the deciders that are deciding wrong. And I say, fluoride is really, really toxic to political careers. And it happened in Modesto. The city council voted to put fluoride in the water. After the citizens had become informed about it, and they said, don't do it. And the city council still did it. At the next cycle, every single person that voted for it lost their job. They haven't held another one since. Woohoo! Yes, yes for democracy. This has happened over and over again, but the politicians think what they're going to do is they're going to do the business of the big donor, and it's money laundering. Is that the California Dental Association passes out huge amounts of money, as well as the Oregon Dental Association in Washington. One of the biggest donors to politics is the dentist, the dental associations. And that's money laundering, because what they do is they set up nonprofits that industry contributes to. And then they take dues-paying funds to lobby for the children's health.
Right.
And so they're helping Cargill get rid of their hazardous waste problems. Cargill is the biggest producer, or was, and I have hope, because if you've been watching the machinations of the largest privately owned corporation in the world, which is Cargill, and they were also the largest producer of hydrofluorosilicic acid. And that since about 1995, when more and more data has been coming out on the specific substance, hydrofluorosilicic acid, and the injury it's causing to our citizens, what they did is they created a baby, and they called it Mosaic. And they traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And what they've just done is they've cut the umbilical cord. Get out of here! And so that's their solution to toxic assets, is they'll create a new baby and send it out into the abyss. So who's going to lose their money when the rest of the world figures out that they don't want any hydrofluorosilicic acid in their food or their water or their air? And that'll be poor old Mosaic and all the union funds that were used to buy, you know, for the retirement and all that stuff when it collapses. Or you could short it and make a bundle, because it's going for way too much money now for a hazardous waste distributor company. Yeah, crooked? Crooked is a dog's hind leg, as we say.
God. Is ignorance bliss? Or
No.
Are we doing the right thing here?
Ignorant is not bliss. I just can't abide that in a democracy. Is educated populace is bliss, because then the crooks can't go do their usual dirty business. And that, like I said, power is a magnet for crooks. And so the more power we give government, the more crooks move into it. And so the more centralized it is, the happier they are, because they don't have to cheat with 1,000 little communities throughout the United States. And you know, if you look at like Portland, Portland is not fluoridated, and that's because every time they've tried to put it in the water, the citizens have rose up and said, don't do it. San Diego, we're rising up now because we have a law that protects us. And so we were kicked out of court 10 years ago because the court says, well, they haven't actually got it in the water yet, so you're premature in your lawsuit.
It's on the board, right?
Well, they've stolen money from children, because the first 5, the citizens of California set aside a huge chunk of money from cigarette tax to take care of children in the first 5 years. And Ron Roberts and the crooks on first 5 decided to take that money and buy hazardous waste for the water supply, which will demonstrably harm babies. Even the American Dental Association admits that. So those people need to find another job. I know how to balance the budget. We're going to do some unemployment first.
Yes. Shake some trees, right?
Well, it's time for us to start shaking up some of these old people that keep doing the same thing, and it's wrong. Whether you're Mubarak or Ron Roberts or Marty Emerald, if you vote to put poison in the water, you don't get to be my representative. So the bottom line is if you've put a substance in the water that everybody, but everybody admits is going to overdose the baby, you need to stop doing it. It's not a politically correct thing to do to poison babies. I'm sorry, that's not correct. And if you want to watch it, it's on my YouTube channel. I can give it to you. And poison babies. And myself and Dr. Thiessen, who was on the National Academies of Science, reviewed the dose that babies would receive from the Metropolitan Water District's decision to add hydrofluorosilicic acid from China to our water supply. And when she got all done, she was an invited speaker. She got all done, this whole water board, this people that made decisions for 18 million people, could not think of a single question to ask Dr. Thiessen. You must be pretty arrogant and confident that your decision to poison the water supply is without any personal liability or harm to you when you decide to add hydrofluorosilicic acid to 18 million people's drinking water. I have a bunch of YouTube videos. I have about 60.
Channel?
David Kennedy DDS.
Okay, and that's your YouTube channel?
Yes.
Oh, did you get that? Yep.
David Kennedy DDS, and you can see, if you ever want to do a documentary on amalgam, you can see Smoking Teeth. If you want to do a documentary on horses, you can see Poisoned Horses, because it poisons horses too.
So if fluoride is so bad for our children, our babies, what is it doing to our pets, our other babies, our other loved ones?
It poisons them. In my documentary, Poisoned Horses, Kathy Justice talked about her prize broodmares. A broodmare will drink 30 gallons of water when it's nursing, and her broodmares were the ones that became poisoned first, and because they were drinking fluoridated tap water, and that it also poisoned her dogs. So it poisons everything it comes in contact with, whether it's a dog or a parakeet or a horse. And that the horses were proven to be poisoned by a veterinarian pathologist, Leonard Kruk at the Cornell University. She sent bones from 3 different horses. One was hers and 2 were other people's that were drinking the same water. And what he did is he analyzed the amount of fluoride in the bone, and he sliced the bone up, and he did histological examination of it. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You can look at this and see clearly this is abnormal bone, and the only thing it causes it to look like that's fluoride. And the conclusion, published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, was these horses were fluoride poisoned.
Wow. Yeah, because I mean, how many pets do you hear people, having hip dysplasia?
Oh, well, the hip dysplasia is always associated with it. The big thing that they found, which is, you hear about the dogs going crazy and eating the baby and stuff like that. Well, they had a horse that they didn't tell me about this till after I'd made the video, is that they had a horse named Sienna, which Wayne, whenever he walked by, the horse would try to take a chunk out of him. And a horse can bite pretty hard, those horse teeth, they're not friendly. And Sienna turned from a mean horse trying to bite him to a lover in the space of less than a year when they took the fluoride away. And they've had this horse for a decade. But it went from a mean horse to a friendly horse, and another horse did the same. And so you can see it hurts Wayne. He says, I almost thought of selling him. But that was his.
How did they remove? What did they use?
Well, Kathy, how'd they remove it from the water? They went over and got water from the river. They got one of the farmers that would give them their allotment from the river. And B, Kathy put together a bunch of citizens who went down and made the liars tell their lies, and then they stood up and showed the lie. Is it the only way you can sell this is if you just believe the lie and then put your head down and say, well, yeah, they said it was okay. But if Kathy knew more about fluoride than the promoters, and she educated, they had meeting after meeting with more than 100 people attending in a town of 6,000, so that's pretty good. And so when the water board began to consider this after they'd heard the lies, and then they were confronting. Okay, you say this, how about that? You say this, how about that? Is the product actual fluoride or is it hydrofluorosilicic acid? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the time they all done, she showed the water board the autopsies of her prize horses and asked them, do you know how much that horse was worth? And they said, no, don't know. And she says, I buy them for $30,000. I sell them for $500,000 after they've won all the shows. and you've killed 4 of them.
Wow.
Now they're up to 6, I think. So,
And
but
so they
they don't have a
decisions.
$500,000 to rub together, and so when they're looking at paying out $500,000, well, there's a whole state is probably going to get defluoridated pretty soon.
You think what, of Californians?
No, not California. We have the best legislature money can buy.
Yeah, I was just going to say. It
The,
doesn't seem like it's going to happen here.
there's a number of states that are considering an ordinance very similar to what we passed in Santa Cruz. It's called the Safe Drinking Water Ordinance. And it says nothing can be added to public drinking water for the purpose of medicating the population. It's not first approved by the Food and Drug Administration for the full range of dose they may experience. And furthermore, the actual substance added to the water supply may not have any contaminants that exceed the public health goals. You notice anything about that ordinance? Doesn't contain the word.
Yeah, fluoride.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the dentists are just all up in arms about it because they say, oh, that would stop fluoridation. It would? Why? Oh, because the product is contaminated with enough arsenic that, you know, it's thousands of times above the public health goal, and it's an unusual product. It sucks lead into the people's bodies, but it also contains lead. It's got mercury in it, and so all those things would stop us from putting it in the water if you're going to make sure the product is pure and it doesn't exceed the public health goals. And then of course the full range of dose means that we'd have to have a dose that was okay for the baby as well as the marathon runner and then the athlete and the outdoor worker and the farm worker, and all those people are drinking a lot of water. And how about the person with the head and bad kidneys that drinks a lot of water too? We can't possibly control the dose on this, so we're going to lose the dose. And besides, the FDA has never approved any fluoride-containing substance intended to be ingested to prevent tooth decay. So it's not FDA approved. It's highly contaminated, and it's not safe for everyone. And it would ruin fluoridation. And I say it should.
Yeah, here.
That's our safe drinking water ordinance.
That's great.
But it changes the subject. The subject is the purity of the water. Instead of talking about little children's teeth and whether or not you get a cavity or not, well, A, quit feeding them sugar, and B, teach them how to brush their teeth and not necessarily with hazardous waste, and C, give them good nutrition, because tooth decay is a disease of poverty, parenting, and nutrition. And so if you feed the kid right, you make sure that they take care of their teeth, they're not going to have a significant amount of tooth decay. After the fools in Sacramento decided that they were going to medicate our water with hazardous waste from the phosphate fertilizer industry, we started to do an initiative here in the state of California. And that when we submitted that to the state for certification, Dan Lundgren, the Attorney General, put a biased summary on it. And he said that based upon the Legislative Analyst Office evaluation, that we were going to, our bill, if passed, would cost the state of California $11 million. And we said, well, show me the math on that. How does saving, $30 million by turning the machinery off cost us 11? And A, they hadn't considered any of the cost of adding the chemical to the water supply or the hazmat equipment or the waste disposal or any of that kind of stuff or the environmental impact. They hadn't considered any of that stuff. And they said that because they anticipated a 60% reduction in dental care costs for welfare recipients, that they were going to save all that money. And A, we took the data from the welfare costs of dental care and showed in court that there is no significant difference whether the county of the state had 10% with the waters fluoridated or 90% fluoridated. There was no difference in the dental care costs. So to allege that there's going to be a 50 or 60% drop in cost when in the last 60 years there's been no change is kind of like optimistic. And two, they said that we pointed out that it will cause a dramatic increase in dental fluorosis. We were talking earlier about how they've now lowered the recommended level. That's because more than half the kids have dental fluorosis. They said, well, yeah, it will cause a lot of dental fluorosis, but welfare doesn't pay for cosmetic dentistry, so we don't have to include that cost because it wouldn't cost us a thing because we're the government.
Wow.
That's actually court documents. They actually said that. I mean, how can you say that stuff with a straight face?
I'm saying a lot with straight faces.
They're not like you and I.
No, they aren't, are they? They're evil.
What do you think, Paul?
I mean, I think it's great. Is there
I touched on everything I wanted to, and
is there anything? You know what I'd like to go into again is aluminum. being a product of fluoride, and you said it's not.
Not.
I'd like to go through that one more time
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Just a connection, because
Okay.
you mentioned it's a smelting process, and it's actually,
All metals leak fluoride.
What
When
is
you
fluoride?
Fluoride is a mineral. It's on the periodic chart. It's and you see, if you look at a periodic chart, it's on the right hand side. It's fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. They all kind of sound alike, don't they? They're called the halogens. And the fluorine is a poison. Chlorine is essential for us, but it also can poison you. It was mustard gas in World War I. Chlorine, bromine is the one that they keep sticking in your bread all the time, and it's not a nutrient. And iodine, which is a nutrient. So iodine is the antidote to fluoride poisoning, but it's a nutrient, and the other stuff is not. The fluoride is what's called a xenobiotic. It's a poison. It'll, a little bit poisons a little bit, and a lot more poisons a lot more. And enough will kill you. It takes 5 milligrams per kilogram to kill anybody on the planet. 5 milligrams per kilogram, everybody will die. And so that's great. So how about a baby on a bottle at 1 part per million? The baby's taking in a quarter of a milligram a day. And so if 5 milligrams per kilogram will kill them in 1 day, does taking in 1 milligram a day, if the baby, say, 4 kilograms, that means 20 milligrams would kill it, so a 1/20th of a lethal dose? Well, there's a study from 20 years ago showing infant mortality was higher in fluoridated communities. Is that why? I don't know. Why didn't they do a follow-up study? I think that would be interesting to know. We're clear down here on infant mortality. When the rest of the world, I mean, Zimbabwe is above us, give me a break. So,
something that hasn't even been looked into or thought.
well, it's been thought about, but what they do is they try to cover up the evidence of their guilt as opposed to dealing with it. I mean, when was the last time, these people are in the business of protecting their job. They are greedy, money-grubbing idiots who could not make a living in the private sector. And I can tell you, I've debated them. They don't have the sense God gave a goose. Those people who failed in every aspect of their life get a job in government promoting fluoridation. They really are a bunch of fools and evil people who allow their own ignorance to poison their entire country. And they know they're lying. How can you know they know they're lying? It's because of how they choose to cite the research. We've even got testimony under oath in depositions from advocates for fluoridation that that's what they do. That's not a scientist, that's an advocate. So let's not have the advocates go in and give money to our politicians to have them do the wrong thing. Make them do the right thing. And the only way we can do that is for your film to be a success, and then we can get the citizens riled up enough that we can stand in the city hall and say, we're tired of you guys taking money and doing the other guy's business. You protect our children first. If you can't pass this safe drinking water ordinance, we'll pass it ourselves.
So what's the solution?
Right there.
It's democracy. Is it the solution is democracy. You stop the politicians from poisoning the children, and you protect your country, and then your country will prosper, and your children will too.
No. Ugh.
I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out.
And I'm not. That's
And 25% of the dentists have figured it out. I mean, they're the poor bastards that have been indoctrinated for 4 years by somebody in a white coat in the front of the room telling them how good it was. 25% of them don't believe that joke anymore.
Just, is that it? You think 25% have come forward and said they don't?
No. They're going to fill out a form.
Right.
Well, if I can fill out this form anonymously, I'll say, no, I don't believe in it. That was a survey that was done just this last month of dentists. 25% of them said, 26% of them said that they didn't think water fluoridation was beneficial anymore. And, that's, well, that's the dogma. That's what you're taught in school from the get-go. It's good, it's good, it's good. It's been proven by thousands of studies. I got tape of one guy, Michael Weasley, that so fat he can't reach a patient. He's never worked on a patient. He's about 8,000 pounds, and he's kind of like it's kind of like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, anyway, poor guy. But anyway, so, in one interview, he said there were 300 studies showing it was safe and effective. The next interview, he said there's 3,000 studies. And being so stupid, he couldn't remember what he said in the first two. He said the next one, he said there are 30,000 studies. And so it's like, hey, Mike, is it 300 or 400 or 600 or why would you? And so I was in Nebraska, in Norfolk, Nebraska, and so I said, well, since you've got so many studies, well, why don't you tell me the one study that you think was pretty well done and you know, it was broad-based and blinded and randomized controls that found a significant reduction in permanent tooth decay. And all you anti-fluoridationists are all alike. Fluorophobe, 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 you are a fluorophobe.
That's his answer, right?
I can see why they bullied him in school. If you want to make fun of.
Still sitting with him, huh?
He still got the taunts that the kids shouted at him. You are an idiot, you are an idiot.
Oh,
so anyway, he's still an idiot, in my opinion. Yeah. So he's the reason Kentucky is totally fluoridated. He got a job for 6 months or something like that as the dental director of Kentucky, and they got the legislature to mandate that all the water supply be fluoridated. What state in the union has the fewest people with teeth?
Kentucky, probably.
Yeah, more tooth loss in Kentucky than almost any other state. And that, you know, so is that a really good deal, or is that that's just Kentucky, huh? California had in 1995 a much lower tooth decay rate than the nation as a whole. And they say, oh, we need to do what they're doing in Kentucky because, you know, those Kentuckians are so clever. They've put hydrofluorescent acid in the water and they've experienced the benefits of water fluoridation. Well, the benefits of water fluoridation are your teeth falling out. I don't think too many Californians want that.
Dental bills, right?
Yeah, well, they don't have any dental bills because they don't have any dentists. They got Jack Call, a really good dentist down there in Lexington. Or is that Louisville? No, it's Louisville. Yeah. Taught me how to speak Southern. He said, you know, y'all, we say y'all a lot. And then, you know, you may not know the plural of y'all. It's all y'all.
All y'all. All y'all.
That's the plural of all of y'all.
Not just y'all.
Not y'all, it's all y'all.
All y'all.
All y'all. So.
Well, listen, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Kennedy, for sitting down with us, welcoming us into your home and letting us pick your brain a little bit and clarifying some gray areas we had in our research and our journey, and I just want to take a minute to thank you for that.
Well, I want to thank you for doing a documentary so you can tell the rest of the people what we've been trying to tell them, and that get this stuff out of the water because it's not helping anybody. It's just a big bold-faced lie, and you can tell it's a bold-faced lie because they won't debate. And so if there's any subject that's more important than raising the health of the children, that the advocates for this won't sit down and discuss it, you know they're lying. So just ask them the dose that they recommend for a baby, and the whole thing goes away, because the recommended dose for a baby is 0. You can't get to 0 if you adulterate the water with hazardous waste.
Hopefully we'll get there, right?
Well, you know, they're there in Mexico already, you know, so maybe we can catch up to Chile.
Yeah. Oh, take some advice from the third world.
Well, you know, they listen better.
Thanks so much.
They're not so enamored with the hallowed halls of government.
Yeah, right? More government.
They listen a little better.
Yeah.
So it's you know, with the UN is probably going to ban amalgam, not because the American Dental Association said we should, or not because the United States government said we should, but because advocates from America and the Philippines and England and use their own money to get over there as NGOs and lobby the third world countries to get the mercury out of their filling business. He said, you know, your kid's got cavities. Fine, fix them with something else.
Something else. And
don't let the industrialized world sell you mercury, because it causes Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, MS, Lou Gehrig's disease, autism, and cleft palate and hearing loss. That's the short list. It probably causes a zillion other things,
right.
But those are the ones that were definitely covered in our recent meeting with the FDA. Hearing loss is a particularly interesting one. Is a nice lady, Rothwell, showed a dose-dependent relationship. If you had one filling, you had a little bit of hearing loss. She did it in women between the ages of 40 and 45 because you lose a little hearing as you get older, so she took a very narrow age range. She only used women because men don't hear as well as women. Your wife may have told you that. So she only used women, and she only used them in a little short time frame, and she showed that if you had a few fillings, you lost a little bit of hearing in the 14 megahertz and more fillings. They were really,
it's that seesaw effect with everything.
Nice
right?
cause and effect, really.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
you're looking cause and effect here. You know, it's you know, when you control for all the other variables, and you get a dose-dependent relationship, you can say, it looks like that must be causing that.
I just don't get how all these, these professionals and leaders of industry who, they're essentially poisoning themselves. They're killed, their children, their grandchildren. I mean, it's like, where is the conscience?
Well,
I know
the conscience.
It's wrapped up in this.
Well, understand. Yours and my goals may have to do with having a good time and getting cold beer on weekend and finding a nice lady and doing the happy dance and all this stuff. And the corporation has only one goal. That's make money.
Bottom line.
Make money. And that's not necessarily bad. That's what they do. But that's their only goal. And so their goal is not quality of life or longevity or how long, whether or not your joints hurt when you do that. Their goal is to make money. And so there is where you have to regulate. I mean, the Brooklyn Bridge, how many men died? Was it 10,000? When they built the Brooklyn Bridge, the men developed what they called Caisson's disease. Well, Caisson's disease is called the bends.
Right.
And they basically were working underwater or below down here, and there are many atmospheres of pressure, and they got the bends. They felt better working. Like today, if you got a job scuba diving for the Navy or something like that, they say, all right, here's your tables, and you can spend 20 minutes on the bottom, and then you can come back, Right. Well, here these guys would go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and get off at 8 o'clock at night. And they're anxious to get back to work because they felt better at work.
Being under the water, under the pressure,
well, they
right?
put all the nitrogen back in their bloodstream.
Yeah,
they didn't decompress them. They just said, "Work's over."
Yeah, come on.
A friend of mine died right out there in the. He made it to the hospital, but he died of the bends. He was scuba diving out there in the kelp beds, and they're only 60 feet deep right there. Yeah. And he went to the boat too fast. He was down getting lobsters, and he said, "Oh, about time to go home."
Came up too quick.
Nose started bleeding. His buddy rode him to shore to shore, and they couldn't save him. Big, strong guy, 6'4", muscle.
No kidding.
Stronger than I am.
Yeah, it's 60 feet, huh?
60 feet. It's how long you're on the bottom.
Yeah, thank you,
Good
sir.
job.
Thank you.
And you have nice teeth.
Oh, appreciate that.
Hey.
That's the money can buy.
We're trying to stay away from that fluoride.
Well, yeah.
We're doing everything we can. We're buying glass bottles and,
Well,
and going to these reverse osmosis centers, where they sell
But if it doesn't help.
Well, some do, some don't, and that's the reason you got to get your fluoride tester. I'll show you. That's in the other room. But you have to. These machines, when we first started this battle, one of the guys that services the machines that sit out in front of the grocery store and you put a quarter in, you get water out.
Right.
Okay, if it's a good machine, it does a good job.
Right.
And he says what happens is it's a commercial RO machine. Basically, it wastes a lot of water, but it takes water and squashes it through the membrane under pressure. So when a water molecule is H2O and it's a little hydrogen molecule, and O this way and O this way. Well, under pressure, you can squash it out like this, so it'll squeeze through the membrane and the fluoride gets left behind. But fluoride's actually smaller than the water molecule. But except for the fact the water is kind of strange and you can squeeze it and make it change shape under pressure. Right. Well, they're just I think I'll go like this to get through the hole. And so that's how you force the water through the hole. They'll take seawater. And you look at the membrane that you've got under your sink, and it's as thin as a sheet of paper. Seawater, they got inch-thick membranes, and then they have a pipe going down the center, and they got huge amounts of pressure squeezing the water out. Right. And so it's basically going through a multiple pressurized membrane system to get all the gunk out of the water. Okay, that's fine, great. But fluoride eats the membranes. So in the little home machines you get at the dime store and then dies in a blink, you don't know. I mean, I was telling Richard Sauerheber the other day, he's got that little fluoride tester. I said, what you need to do, we'll put this on a chip and we'll put it in the machine, and when it comes on, it says change membranes.
Yeah.
And there's another way to get the fluoride out.
That's smart.
Yeah. Why not?
I mean, it's so common sense.
But otherwise, I had a patient one time. She said, well, her dad had put an RO system in her kitchen, and so she didn't have any problem. And I said, when did he put it in? She said, well, I came to San Diego in about 3 years ago. And I said, well, have you changed the membranes? She said, membranes? I don't think so.
Well, I think you're still getting a little dose of fluoride.
I said, well, it was back before San Diego had fluoride, so I said, call your dad. But anyway, there's a whole, one of the things that, nice to have a professor working on this, that San Marcos, Professor Sauerbeer teaches at San Marcos. You might want to interview him. He's a little off the wall sometimes. He's wrong on some stuff. You know, he doesn't. He might tell you that it's coming from the aluminum factory or something like that. Richard, read the shit if you're going to talk about it. You know. Come on. I bark at him and he said, all right. But you know, it's like if you make one mistake in anything you're saying, oh, well, everything's wrong.
Everything's gone.
Everything's wrong. Everything's wrong. Okay, how's the baby? Well, maybe that. But anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why I try to focus them. Let's focus on the baby. If you can't give it to the baby, you can't give it to anybody.
Yeah.
Well, you know, those kids, they're just too short. They just can't take it like us guys.
Yeah. But if it's not good for them, it can't be good for us either. Like.
Oh, there you go being logical again. See, you haven't had enough fluoride yet. Let me give you some more fluoride.
Some more, right? A lot of
You're being too logical. But anyway, you need to see what a fluoride tester. You can take the fluoride out with a thing. When we were in Thailand, they were using bone char. They were making their own, actually. Because, you know, they have these big old horned beasts that they're around, and the Thais aren't opposed to eating cows. And so they basically taught the guy that used to be the school bus driver, and he's retired at 65. And so his new job is to collect bones from the rest of the villagers, put it in a retort, cook them up, turn them into bone char, put them in about a 3-foot long piece of 4-inch PVC tubing, and glue the caps on, drill a hole in, put a pipe here and a pipe here, and run water in this end and come out this end. And then you got water that's run through bone char, and that's what they were doing at the schoolyard, at individuals' houses, and at the Buddhist monastery.
Solely for the purpose of the fluoride?
Yeah.
Was that
That's all it takes out.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's the only thing. All right.
And if you don't cook it on enough, it tastes like rotted meat. So, but anyway, so he was showing us how to cook it and gave us all a glass of water. It tastes pretty good. But and the other thing that the Thais did is that they had a big problem with skeletal fluorosis in Thailand. So they went over there with their little tester and they tested all the wells. The dentist did this. They tested all the wells. And because the well in Thailand was dug like this, you know, and so these are all, you know, 40, 60-foot wells. And what they found was when they tested a village, they might have 60 wells in a village and 60 houses in a village, and 40 of them would be bad, and 10 of them would be okay, and 5 of them would be pretty good. Mm-hmm. And so they told the people that had the pretty good ones that you have really good water. People should drink your water. And they said, oh, it's a gift from Buddha. I am so happy to share. And imagine that. Give away my water, I got to. But in Thailand, it worked wonderfully. They just said, this is a good well, and this is a good well. And, oh, we're blessed. Thank you for us to give you this gift of our water. And so they shared water for the animals and for the rest of the community. Out of those 5 or 6 wells they found that were decent, and the others were used to wash the clothes and water the fields. They don't have any flush toilets, so you know. And then so you know the field gets watered with a bucket. So it was just a different world. Why? The question that comes to mind is how come the dentists have made so many stupid things? I mean, gum disease is rampant. 90% of the population have gum disease, and it's basically an infection in the mouth. If 90% of the people had infected eyes, do you think the ophthalmologist would be criticized for not correcting that? Well, I think the dentists need to be criticized. It's a simple infection. It needs to be treated. Right. Why are they putting mercury fillings in teeth? Nobody wants mercury fillings, so they call them silver. So you don't know. So it's a deception. Why would you do that? You do that because you're taught to do that. I remember sitting next to one of my classmates in dental school when he called a filling mercury. And the instructor just went ballistic on him. And if you want to see that exact same diatribe said word for word, watch the tapes of the FDA hearing, because a dental instructor said exactly the same words. Oh, we don't call them mercury because they're silver colored, and it upsets the patient to call them mercury. Well, it ought to upset the patient to call them mercury, for heaven's sake. And so then they recommend fluoride because it reduces tooth decay. And then they say, well, 1 part per million in the water, well, that's not quite strong enough to have a topical effect, so we get 1,000 parts per million in the toothpaste. Oh, well, that's not quite strong enough, so we have a 5,000 prescription. That's not quite strong enough. So there's 50,000 parts per million is what they paint the little children's teeth with. A little bit doesn't work, so you're going to do more and more and more. The reason they make all these blunders is they have no training in toxicology. Toxicology is how you understand how these molecules affect the physiology. Ask any dentist, how does mercury poison? He's like, we don't know. Well, I don't think you ought to be handling it then, because you probably need a little more training. We don't know. Well, how does fluoride work? Well, it makes the teeth hard. Well, doesn't hard break? Well, it doesn't really make them that hard. Well, it works to kill the bacteria. Well, when you look at the studies, it doesn't really kill the bacteria. Oh, well, it works topically. Well, what's that mean to you? You know, it forms a scum on the teeth. Well, they've just measured the scum and it's thinner than a sheet of paper. It's not. So they just keep coming up with theories about how it might work.
With no proof.
And so they keep changing the theory to fit what they want to say. And that's not science, that is politics. Right. And that's what dentists are taught. And the dentists think that criticizing someone else's research is the equivalent of doing research yourself. Mm-hmm. So remember years ago we put mercury fillings in sheep. And then they were radioactive. You lay the sheep down on a scanner like they do for cancer, and you look and see where the mercury went, and it was saturated the jawbone. It was down on the hoof. It accumulated in the heart and the kidneys, and there's a big bunch in the intestines because the sheep was chewing and swallowing this stuff. And so they said, oh, well, sheep chew too much. Oh, okay. Do sheep chew more than a teenager with gum?
Yeah.
No, they actually chew a little less. A sheep chews about 8 hours a day, and a teenager can chew about 16. So, but that's okay. We'd already set up to repeat the experiments in monkeys, and exactly the same thing happened in monkeys. What's the matter with monkeys? And so what do they say now? Animal studies don't count. And so they did a horribly unethical experiment in children. Wait, we got laws against experimenting on orphans. Well, then we better do it in Portugal then. So they did a Portuguese experiment where they took children in an orphanage and put mercury fillings in their teeth. And they said, see, no problem. Well, they actually had kids with amalgams in the controls. Is that cheating or what? And so they said, okay, this group and this group are not the same because these kids scored out a lot of mercury when we started, but as time went by, they secreted less and less and less and less. And at the end of the experiment, the amount of mercury coming out of the kids with a mouthful of amalgam was no different than the kids with no amalgams at all. So how do you explain that? Well, when we quit putting fillings in, the mercury went down. Well, what day did you quit putting the fillings in? Oh, well, we really never quit putting the fillings in. Yeah. Okay, so a friend of mine, through the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, we funded a reanalysis of the data. It's a government study, so they can't hide the data. They were trying, but some of the people are pretty ethical, and they said, well, here's our data. Yeah. And when you reanalyze the data, and what you did is you take all the kids that had amalgams that were in the control group, right. You move them over here to the experimental group, because the experimental group's the ones with amalgams, the ones without amalgams are over here. So now you have a clean control group. And then you took kids that had one filling and you said, okay, that's one. And the kids that had two, that's two. The kids had three, that's three. And you lay them out linearly rather than put them all in the same bucket. And they had actually measured for a porphyrin, which is caused by mercury poisoning. It's called coporphyrinogen. And what they showed was there was a dose-dependent relationship between the coporphyrinogen and the number of amalgams in their children's teeth. So their horribly unethical children's amalgam study from Portugal has proven injury from putting mercury fillings in children's teeth. And so what are they going to say to that?
It was done in Portugal.
Oh, it's done by Americans in Portugal. Yeah. Well, they also did one in New England, and what they did is they paid them in New England. We haven't gone through the data on New England. It'll show the same thing. When the dentists like to say, you can't prove that caused this, that's the cigarette defense. Mm-hmm. When R.J. Reynolds says, well, you can't prove that smoking my cigarette's going to cause that. Well, 30,000 studies later, they were able to prove that caused this. Mm-hmm. We don't need 30,000 studies with mercury. Mercury is a very unique poison that wherever there's two sulfur molecules like this, mercury gets in between. And so when you have enzymes that have this particular sulfur-sulfur bond, right. And the mercury gets in the middle and breaks that apart, that inhibits that enzyme specifically, and so it's a mercury inhibition of a specific enzyme. That is a fingerprint. Wow. And so, truth be told, we can prove that caused this, and we don't need a million studies. We got the DNA now. We can do it.
It is affecting the genetically in the DNA makeup, or
no? It's
leaving a fingerprint.
It's affecting people who are genetically susceptible to mercury. Is that some people say, well, I've been exposed to mercury and it never bothered me. I had a guy in World War II guy, was a patient of mine, and he said, the subject came up, mercury, and he says, mercury doesn't bother me. And I said, interesting, you should know that. How do you know that? Yeah. And he said, well, when I was 17, I joined the United States Navy, and he said, I got a job as weathermen. And he said, on an aircraft carrier, and he told me the name, and it served in the Pacific Fleet, where it was hot. And he said, we were in a room way below decks, and it had a 6-inch porthole, and that was the only ventilation they had. And he said, there was so much mercury in that room that when it leaned this way, the mercury ran over that. When it leaned this way, the mercury ran over that way. And it had 3 open bowls of mercury to set the barometric pressure, because when you're trying to land an airplane on an aircraft carrier, your altimeter is based upon barometric pressure. So he had to have 3 of them that all said the same thing, so he knew he was telling the pilot the right barometric pressure to set on his dial. And when one got off, you had to take all this mercury, pour it back in the bowl, and pour it back in here, and make it a big mess. And he said, I served that duty 12 hours on, 12 hours off for 3.5 years during World War II. Didn't bother me a bit. And I said, well, how do you know that the room was toxic? There was a lot of mercury around, but how do you know the room was toxic? Oh, he said, that's easy. Everybody that served opposite me was sick at the most in 90 days. Some of them it took, just a time or two. But he said that nobody could stand the duty like I did. And he said, after that, I got a job over at North Island. I was the weatherman there too. He said, mercury doesn't bother me. And you know what his genetic makeup is? I'll bet you a nickel to a dollar he's an APOE22. Which? Tutus excrete mercury well.
Is that right?
So he can take a bath in it, doesn't bother him. Wow. So what happens is when people go to a dental school and they work for a little bit, maybe they're a 4-4. Mm-hmm. They're suicidal or confused before they get through their freshman year or sophomore year. And so they drop out, or they become government dentists promoting fluoridation because they're too stupid to do dentistry. And the ones that are 2-2s, they practice for a lifetime. My grandfather was a dentist. My dad is 98 years old, still alive today. A little peripheral neuropathy. Well, mercury bothered him a little bit, not too bad. a little bit. But 98 is pretty good. Who can shake a stick at that? So there are different genetic subsets. Yeah. And that, maybe he had enough selenium in his diet. Mm-hmm. Maybe he didn't have that many mercury fillings in his teeth. I took his fillings out and replaced them with plastic 30 years ago. So.
Now, is that the same with fluoride? Is it if
fluoride is not I don't know of any gene that helps you get rid of fluoride. Mm-hmm. Fluoride, I think the impact of it's primarily the dose and the presence of mitigating factors such as calcium, magnesium, vitamin C, and selenium. Mm. And those help your body detox the fluoride as it comes in. But I'm not aware of any mitigating factor. I do know that African Americans and Hispanics have definitely been shown to be more sensitive to it. The suggestion is it's because of lactose intolerant, which means it would be Asians and some Jews and most North American, Native Americans in North and South America would fall into that category too, because they weren't cattle raisers. Is that the lactose is the sugar that comes from milk, and that God gives you a nice enzyme to digest it when you're born, and 2-3 years old, it cuts it off, and then when you drink milk after that, it gives you a stomachache. And that's to get the kid off mom. And so it's a weaning technique that God has to get mom away from the kid after a while. Yeah, you can't drink anymore. But if you spend your life walking around after cows, then you don't have that advantage. And so so San Diego began fluoridating this week. And a lady contacted me because her 8-year-old son has hives every time he takes a shower. And
San Diego just started fluoridating?
This week. Wow. Woohoo! Thank you very much.
Oh, thank goodness.
Well, yeah.
Wow. I'm glad they're catching up to the rest of America.
Yeah, we can be stupid as the people in Kentucky. Now that I got fixed in, I can feel like a human being again. It's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. But
so he's breaking out in hives.
Breaking out in hives, and I told him, where do you live? And his area is fluoridated. I said, you might want to consider another method of bathing because it absorbs right through your skin. And she went on to say, well, we're Asian. Well, gee, are you lactose intolerant? Oh, yeah, well, duh.
There you go. Huh?
So, buy bottled water, take a bath in that. Right direction.
That's great.
And everybody should be out measuring this stuff all the time because it's, you can probably grab a couple pictures off the internet of it from the...
And how do you do it now? How do you...
Okay, all you got to do, you set a standard up, So it knows where 1 and 10 are, and so you set up a log graph on it, and you get it so it reads 1, and so it reads 10, and ever after that it's going to read down to 0.1 or up to 10 and give you a nice accurate reading. And so that's the ion-specific electrode. It measures the fluoride ion, and then it's basically an electric pH meter, and that little electrode right there just lets the fluoride ion through, so it's just measuring fluoride. So.
And where you can get that offline, huh? Online?
Yeah, it's sold by a company called Lamont, and they've been very helpful to us. I took a Lamont tester to China when we shot the video in China, and then they've invented this one, which is much more accurate than the tester I took, but you know, it was not available then, but certainly can stick that in your pocket and carry it with you, can you?
That's something we're going to need. So.
Well, you're going to need it. You don't really need it because you can just assume Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego are all fluoridated.
Right.
Don't drink the water.
Right.
Don't eat at the restaurants. Don't eat the pasta. Don't eat the rice. It's a crime. It's a crime, and I think the people, personally, I'm kind of looking forward to punishing the people that did this. And the way we can do that is that they're all greedy, self-centered people who want to get money from dentists, and they're called politicians. And so what they need to do is that they put fluoride in your water. You need to make sure that they never ever serve in public office again. That's the only way to punish them. So fluoride is really toxic to political careers.
Perfect. You have any say about it?
If I had any say about it, well, I don't, but they don't pay attention to me.